One impulsive kiss at a black tie gala was all it took to permanently destroy Blythe Weston's carefully ordinary life. She thought she was saving a stranger from a silent, elegant execution. She pressed her lips to his in front of 200 witnesses, completely blind to the truth burning beneath the surface that the man she was trying to protect was the most dangerous person in the room. The Grand Hyatt Houston's main ballroom smelled like white roses and old money. The kind of money that arrived in armored cars and left without signatures. Blythe moved through the crowd in a crisp white service uniform, balancing a tray of champagne flutes with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done this 50 times before. At 26, she was a licensed paramedic with Harris County EMS on weekdays and a banquet server for Prestige Event Group on weekends. Because one income wasn't enough to keep the lights on and service the hospital debt her father had left behind after 18 months in the ICU at Memorial Hermann. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer had a way of being thorough. Thorough in how it hollowed a man out, and thorough in how it hollowed a family's savings account down to nothing. So Blythe smiled at hedge fund managers and poured champagne for oil executives, and she kept her shoulders square and her expression neutral, because the tips were good and the grief was hers alone to manage. The charity gala was ostensibly for a children's literacy foundation. $3 million in donations expected by midnight. The room was a cathedral of chandelier light and custom Italian suits, and it buzzed with the particular performative warmth of very rich people congratulating themselves for their generosity. Blythe was circling the far end of the bar when she saw him. He stood near the floor-to-ceiling windows at the south end of the room, slightly apart from the crowd, holding a glass of what she recognized as Pappy Van Winkle bourbon, with the posture of someone who owned the building and simply hadn't bothered to mention it. He was tall, not artificially tall, but the kind of tall that came with a wide frame, broad across the shoulders, wearing a black tuxedo so precisely fitted it looked like a second skin. His hair was dark, his jaw clean-shaved and angular, and even from 20 feet away Blythe could see the deliberate stillness in him. Not relaxation, something more controlled than relaxation. He wasn't socializing. He was watching the room the way she'd been trained to watch accident scenes. Cataloging, calculating, managing invisible variables. She almost looked away. Then she saw the two men moving toward him. They were wrong the moment she clocked them. Wrong in the way her paramedic instincts registered wrongness before her brain could articulate the reason. The too deliberate stride, the way their eyes swept the room without landing on anything social, the slight angular heaviness at the left hip of the larger one, beneath a tuxedo that fit well but not well enough. Blythe had done 2 ride-alongs with HPD in her first year on the job. She had been present at 1 shooting scene and 1 attempted robbery, and she knew the shape of a concealed sidearm the way other people recognized a familiar song. One of them had a gun. They positioned themselves with the window at the stranger's back and the crowd as camouflage, boxing him in from 2 angles. The taller one said something close to his ear. The stranger didn't step back. He didn't react at all, and that was somehow more disturbing than fear would have been. No one else in the room had noticed. The string quartet played Debussy. A woman in a red Valentino gown laughed too loudly at someone's joke. The charity auction MC tested his microphone from the stage. Blythe set her tray on the nearest surface and stopped thinking. She walked directly toward them. Later, she would try to reconstruct the logic of it and find nothing logical there at all. She was a paramedic, not a police officer. She had no weapon, no backup, no plan. What she had was the particular recklessness that comes from watching someone die slowly over 18 months and deciding at a cellular level that preventable death was the one thing she would not stand by and allow. "There you are," she said it loudly, projected it with the theatrical confidence of someone who had absolutely nothing to lose, and she walked straight through the gap between the 2 men without acknowledging them at all. She reached the stranger and grabbed the lapel of his tuxedo. His eyes dropped to her hand. 2 seconds of genuine surprise crossing a face that did not appear built for surprise, and then Blythe Weston did the most reckless thing she had ever done in her entire reckless life. She kissed him. Not a brush, not a hesitation. She pulled herself up onto the balls of her feet and kissed Riordan Thane full on the mouth in the middle of the Grand Hyatt Houston ballroom, in front of 200 witnesses, while 2 armed men stood 3 feet away, wondering what in the hell had just happened. For one fraction of a second he went completely rigid, every muscle locked and coiled, and she thought, I've miscalculated. This is going to end badly. And then something shifted. A low sound came from his chest, barely audible, half a breath and half something darker. His right hand came up and settled against her jaw, not grabbing, not rough, just a flat palm with a heat to it that she felt straight through to the back of her skull, and he kissed her back with a slow, deliberate authority that was nothing at all like the theatrical chaos she had intended. It was concentrated, it was total. She tasted bourbon and something else underneath, something smoke-dark and entirely unfamiliar, and for 4 seconds she forgot completely why she had started this. Around them, people noticed. Couples turned. A woman said something delighted to her companion. Someone near the bar began to clap slowly, ironically, the way drunk people do at public displays of affection. A photographer working the event for the Houston Chronicle swung around and raised his camera, the flash firing twice in quick succession. Witnesses. Blythe had created witnesses. When he broke the kiss, it was so slow and deliberate that she had to actually step back to end it. He looked at her. The dark amusement in his expression was shot through with something that looked, improbably, like genuine curiosity. His thumb grazed the corner of her bottom lip once, almost reflexive, and then his gaze moved briefly past her shoulder to where the 2 men had been standing. They were gone. "Walk with me," Blythe said, her voice dropping to something urgent. Her hands were shaking. She locked them around his forearm and kept her face arranged in the serene expression of a woman in love having a perfectly normal evening. "Smile like you know me. We need to move away from this window right now. You're going to explain what just happened," he said. His voice was low and unhurried, a baritone dragged through gravel, and he was already moving with her without protest, his long stride matching hers with uncanny ease. "Explain later." She steered them toward the service hallway near the kitchen entrance. "Walk now." She pushed through the unmarked door and pulled him after her, the ballroom's gilded noise cutting off sharply behind them. They were in the fluorescent corridor between the main hall and the hotel kitchen, the smell of garlic and hot steel replacing the white roses. 2 busboys wheeling a cart of dirty plates barely glanced at them. Blythe didn't slow down. She took them through the kitchen, past the shouted objections of a sous chef who thought she was management and then realized she was not, and out through the loading dock exit into the warm Houston night. The alley behind the hotel smelled like asphalt and cigarette smoke. A lone kitchen porter leaned against the wall with his phone out, looked up, looked back down. Blythe's heels clicked against the wet concrete, and she finally stopped, pressing her back against the exterior wall and dropping her composure all at once like a coat slipping off her shoulders. Her hands were trembling badly now. She crossed her arms over her chest and breathed. The man she had just kissed, and possibly saved, and definitely involved herself with against every instinct of self-preservation she possessed, leaned against the opposite wall and watched her with the patient attention of someone with nowhere more pressing to be. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and produced a thin cigarette case. Lit one with a silver lighter. "You saw the weapon," he said. It wasn't a question. "Left hip, the taller one." She breathed out. "The way he was standing, the weight distribution, I've been on enough scene calls with HPD to know what a holstered sidearm looks like." She looked at him hard. "They were going to shoot you, right there in the ballroom. The suppressor, the taller one had a suppressor, and with the string quartet nobody would've." She stopped herself. "You need to call the police. Right now. Those men may still be inside." He took a slow drag and exhaled upward. I appreciate the impulse. That's not an answer. No, he agreed, it isn't. Blythe stared at him. He was the calmest human being she had ever encountered, and she had stood next to a burning vehicle at 2 a.m, while the driver asked her if she thought his insurance would cover it. What's your name? Riordan. Riordan. She stared harder. Do you understand what almost just happened to you in there? Better than you do, he said, and something in the quiet certainty of it made the back of her neck prickle. Then why were you just standing there? Why weren't you? The sound that cut her off was not a siren. It was 3 SUVs, matte black, moving in tight formation around the alley entrance with a precision that was absolutely not law enforcement. They stopped hard, doors opened, and men in dark tactical clothing poured out. 8 of them, 9, moving with the brisk economy of people who had done this many times and found it unremarkable. Not one of them aimed anything at Riordan. They surrounded him, facing outward a perimeter. The one closest to Riordan bowed his head a fraction. Mr. Thane. Soren's crew was spotted exiting through the east lobby. We have eyes on the car. Blythe stopped breathing. Riordan's gaze came back to her slowly, and she could see him watching the recognition travel across her face, the name landing, the context assembling itself from the fragments she'd absorbed in passing over 2 years of working Houston event circuits. Thane. Riordan Thane. There was a Thane Industries on the books. Shipping, logistics, real estate. But there was also the name that HPD officers referenced in clipped voices when they thought civilians weren't in earshot. The Thane Network. The entity that controlled port access, distribution contracts, and an entire shadow economy running through the Gulf Coast from Houston to New Orleans. The man who had just let her kiss him in front of 200 people was the most powerful criminal operator between the Sabine River and the Rio Grande. She took 1 step back and found her shoulders against the wall. You were never in danger, she said, her voice coming out very small. Not from Soren's men, no. Riordan pushed off the wall and took 2 measured steps toward her, close enough that she could feel the residual warmth of the ballroom still in his tuxedo. But you are. Every camera in that ballroom caught you with your hands on me. Soren Kovalev has people who watch footage. By morning, he will know your name, your face, and where you live. And Soren Kovalev does not make the mistake of leaving loose threads. The alley felt very cold suddenly, despite the Houston heat. I live in a 1-bedroom apartment in Midtown, Blythe said. I drive a 2019 Civic with a cracked windshield. I am nobody. You were nobody 40 minutes ago, Riordan said. That changed when you kissed me. Before the full weight of that sentence could settle, the night cracked open. The shot came from the roof across the alley, a single flat crack, and then 2 of Riordan's men shouted simultaneously, returning fire before Blythe's brain had even registered the sound. Someone grabbed her arm, pulling her down, and behind the body of the nearest SUV. The world compressed into noise and motion, automatic fire, boots on concrete, a second shot that hit the vehicle's side panel with a sound like a hammer on steel. From somewhere behind her, a wet, choked intake of breath that she recognized the way she recognized nothing else. The sound of a body trying to breathe through something it wasn't designed to breathe through. Blythe turned. Riordan's closest man, the one who had addressed him first, young, maybe 25, a clean-cut face now wearing an expression of profound confusion, was sliding down the side of the SUV with his hand pressed flat against his upper left chest. Blood was spreading through the fabric of his jacket with alarming speed. His lips were moving, but no sound was coming. Pneumothorax. The thought arrived clinical and absolute, overriding everything else. Air in the pleural space. The lung is collapsing. Get him in the vehicle, Riordan was saying, crouched and scanning the rooflines with a focus so concentrated it barely resembled panic. Now, move. Stop. Blythe was already crossing the space between them. Don't move him yet. Give me 2 seconds. She dropped to her knees, pressed 2 fingers against the man's neck, pulse present, rapid, weak, and then flattened her palm against his chest wall and listened with her whole body. The breath sounds on the left were nearly absent. The tracheal deviation was just beginning. "What's his name?" she demanded. "Peyton." Riordan was behind her now, very close. His voice had lost its polish. "His name is Peyton." Peyton. Blythe took his chin in her free hand and made him look at her. His eyes were dilated and frightened. "Look at me. I'm going to fix this. You breathe when I say breathe, not before." She looked back at Riordan. "I need the first aid kit out of whichever vehicle has one. I need it in the next 30 seconds. I need a 14-gauge needle, a chest seal if you have one, and I need someone to hold his shoulders flat, not forward, flat." There was a single beat of silence. "You heard her," Riordan said. The men moved. They were in the lead SUV and moving within 90 seconds. Peyton stretched across the rear cargo area with his head in Blythe's lap, and 2 of Riordan's men pressed into service as her assistants. The kit was comprehensive. That later, the fact that these vehicles traveled with trauma-level medical supplies. And she worked with the stripped-down focus that only ever came when the adrenaline had nowhere to go but inward. She located the second intercostal space with 2 fingers, swabbed with betadine from a foil packet, and told Peyton to breathe out slow. She plunged the needle in. The hiss was immediate and audible over the road noise. Peyton's whole body shuddered once, and then his chest moved. Actually moved. The ribs lifting properly for the first time in 10 minutes, and the expression on his face shifted from terror to something closer to confusion, like a man who had been braced for a door to hit him and found it opening instead. Blythe said, "Good, stay with me." She worked for the next 20 minutes in the dim cargo light of the moving SUV. Chest seal placement, IV line into the antecubital vein, fluids wide open from the bag one of Riordan's men held against his own chest to keep it elevated. She didn't look up. She counted respirations, monitored the seal, managed the line. She had done this in worse conditions. She had done this on the shoulder of I-10 with traffic 3 feet away and a drunk driver still conscious and asking questions. When they arrived at the location, a converted industrial property somewhere in the heights, she thought, though she'd lost track of the turns. Peyton's blood pressure had stabilized enough that she let them carry him inside without gripping his arm the entire way. The interior was nothing like the decaying exterior suggested. Steel-reinforced walls, medical-grade lighting, and a room off the main corridor that looked like it had been designed by someone who understood the difference between a sick bay and a storage closet. Real supplies, a defibrillator, a proper trauma kit with chest tubes. Blythe spent another hour stabilizing Peyton completely, working under the overhead lights with Riordan across the table from her, following every instruction she gave without a single question or objection. She found that noteworthy. Distantly. Men who led things the way Riordan Thane led them were not typically built for taking direction. But he scrubbed when she told him to scrub, held when she told him to hold, and kept absolute silence during the 2 minutes when Peyton's pressure dipped again, and every one of Blythe's mental resources was occupied with keeping it from dipping further. It didn't dip further. When she finally stepped back from the table and peeled off her gloves, Peyton's monitor beeped in a steady, unspectacular rhythm, the most beautiful sound she had heard all night. She dropped into the nearest chair and put her face in her hands. The chair was cold metal. Her ruined server uniform was stiff with dried blood from the knees down. Her feet hurt. It was, she checked the clock on the wall, 20 minutes past 2 in the morning. She heard Riordan dismiss his men from the room. She heard the door close. He sat down across from her. He had removed his tuxedo jacket at some point and rolled up his sleeves, and there were tattoos she hadn't seen before, geometric and dark, running from his right wrist to his elbow in patterns that looked like a map of somewhere that didn't have a name. He had blood on his hands still, from before she had made him scrub. He looked at it for a moment with the distant attention of someone reading a map they already knew by heart. "You're a paramedic," he said. Harris County EMS, weekdays. She looked at Peyton's chest, rising and falling. Banque server on weekends, debt. The single word covered everything she wasn't going to explain. Riordan was quiet for a moment. How long have you been doing both? 14 months, since my father died. He absorbed this the way he absorbed everything, steadily, without reaction that cost him anything. You could have gotten yourself killed tonight. Twice. I was aware of that. And you acted anyway. I'm a paramedic. She looked at him then, directly, and found his eyes on her with an intensity that she was too exhausted to look away from. That's the job. You act anyway. The room held the particular quiet of places where something irreversible has just happened. Riordan leaned forward, forearms on his knees, and in the clinical white light he looked less like what she had imagined a man like him would look like, and more like something uncomfortably human. Soren Kovalev will have your name before dawn, he said. His voice was flat with the specific flatness of things that are simply true. He has people inside the hotel's security network. Your photo, your name, your address, your vehicle registration. He will send someone to your apartment in Midtown. Blythe's stomach dropped. My neighbor has a dog, she said. It came out at a strange angle, not what she'd meant to say, but what surfaced when she thought about her building, her door, the woman across the hall who always left her lights-ons. Mrs. Pruitt. She's 72. She doesn't have anything to do with any of this. No, Riordan agreed, she doesn't. Then this has to end. Whatever this is, you have to end it. Tonight. Not me. I'm a paramedic. I serve champagne on the weekend. I am not equipped for whatever you do. He stood slowly, and the room seemed to contract by a fraction. You walked into a room where 2 armed men were executing an operation that Soren Kovalev had been planning for 6 weeks, Riordan said. He was not raising his voice. He never raised his voice. She was beginning to understand, and that was somehow more frightening than volume. You disrupted it in under 4 minutes using nothing but a borrowed confidence and someone else's name. And then you performed emergency decompression in a moving vehicle on a man you had never met. He looked at Peyton's still form. My most capable people have been with me for 8 years. You've been in this world for 4 hours. That doesn't mean I belong in it. No, he said, it doesn't. He moved toward her, unhurried, stopping close enough that she had to tilt her chin to maintain the look she was refusing to drop. But it means I can't send you back to Midtown and your neighbor's dog and pretend tonight didn't happen. Kovalev has resources. You don't. So what happens now? He reached out, slowly, giving her every chance to step back, and his thumb brushed a smear of Peyton's blood from her cheekbone with a gentleness that was entirely at odds with everything else she knew about him. He didn't take his hand away. Now, Riordan Thane said quietly, you are under my protection, which means you go where I go, you stay where I put you, and you trust that I am considerably more capable of handling Soren Kovalev than any other option currently available to you. Blythe searched his face for the angle in it, for the manipulation, for the moment where this became something she couldn't agree to. She found only that same unsettling steadiness, and beneath it, not warmth exactly, but the echo of it. The shape where warmth would be if someone like him had allowed it to stay. And if I say no, then I drive you to Midtown myself, walk away and hope Kovalev's people are slower than I think they are. He paused. They're not. She thought about the needle going in. She thought about Peyton's chest rising. She thought about her father's hospital room and the specific quality of a decision made in the last possible moment, when all the easier options have expired. One condition, she said. His eyes sharpened. Mrs. Pruitt, Blythe said. The neighbor, someone checks on her tonight. Not your way, she added before he could answer. She needs to know she's safe. A phone call. A welfare check. Something that doesn't terrify her. Riordan held her gaze for 3 full seconds. Done, he said. He was already reaching for his phone. She watched him make the call, brief, specific, a name and an address and an instruction delivered in the same tone he used for everything. and when he lowered the phone, he looked at her with something in his expression that she had no vocabulary for yet. She suspected she would learn it. She suspected, looking at Riordan Thane in the harsh light of a room that smelled like antiseptic and close escapes, that she was going to learn a great deal about a man who had let a stranger kiss him in a hotel ballroom and then followed her instructions without flinching. "You should have run," he said, and it sounded less like a criticism than a genuine, quiet bewilderment. Blythe Weston looked at Peyton's chest rising and falling. Running, she said, was never really an option. Riordan said nothing. He sat back down across from her, his forearms resting on his knees, and the silence between them stopped being the silence of strangers and became something else. Something that had a weight and a texture and a shape. Something that would still be there in the morning when the decisions of this night came fully into focus. From somewhere above the industrial compound, a city moved through the last hours of its night, indifferent and enormous. Below it, Blythe Weston stayed where she was and watched over a man she didn't know, in a building she'd never been, beside a person who scared her and fascinated her in equal measure, and understood that whatever her life had been 24 hours ago, it was no longer what it was going to be. And the most terrifying part, the part she pressed down and refused to examine yet, was that she wasn't entirely sure she wanted it back. If you were holding your breath during that field surgery scene, hit the like button right now and let us know in the comments. Do you think Blythe made the right call staying, or should she have taken her chances and run? Share this story with someone who needs a sleepless night, and subscribe to Dark Mafia stories so you never miss what happens next.